everyone, I'm Captain Logan. Welcome back to The Bunker. It's time for another Saturday request, and this one was given to me by John Early. Today I'm taking a look at The Green Mile, the Stephen King film from 1999, starring Tom Hanks and Michael Clarke Duncan in his big breakout role. Yes, he was in Armageddon the year before, but this was the one that he was nominated for an Oscar for, and that really got everybody's attention. It was like, wow, this guy can really act. And I knew he was in this. It's one of the only things I knew about this movie. I knew that it took place in a prison. I knew that it was Tom Hanks. I knew it was a Stephen King thing. And I got the sense that it was a real Oscar-y kind of movie, which surprised me because Stephen King wrote it. And I always thought, maybe this is one of the few things Stephen King wrote that doesn't have any kind of supernatural component. I don't even know if he's written anything like that, because I haven't read anything. I haven't read everything Stephen King, of course. But I always wondered about this movie, and I never got around to seeing it. And thanks to John, I finally have looked at it, so thanks a bunch to you. And now I'm ready to talk about it a little bit. This is a kind of art housey movie compared to other Stephen King things, but the way I would describe it is, and this is Frank Darabont, and he's a great director, and this watches like somebody just taking a Stephen King novel and understanding his sensibilities better than a lot of movies do, and being less about the sensationalism and the novelty of trying to scare people and just tell a character-driven story like so many Stephen King things do. Very often will, in a Stephen King movie, of course, put the horror and the big concept in front of the characterization, and will create these characters that in a book might have been very fleshed out and very interesting, and people that you really care about, and in the movie kind of just serve to propel forward the scares. And The Shining kind of has that. As gorgeous of a movie as that is, and as interesting as it is to read into the symbolism and stuff in that movie, Jack Torrance is not the fleshed out, interesting character that he is in the book. And this not only doesn't have that problem, but watches like Stephen King could have written the movie himself, if he was decent at screenwriting, because I also watched his Shining miniseries, and he wasn't, at least for that material. So it's really interesting because it feels more like I'm reading a Stephen King book while I'm watching this than watching a movie, and so that makes me feel differently about it than I expected to, because, and I'm sure a lot of people have this where it's like, oh wait, this is Stephen King? If they only watch Stephen King movies, if they only saw Carrie and Firestarter and things like that, and Carrie's a good movie, don't get me wrong, like, I am putting this above a lot of the rest. That's not saying that there aren't other good Stephen King novels and other good adaptations of his material, but my favorite Stephen King thing is Misery, and for a thriller, I think that is still my favorite Stephen King movie, but I think this is at least as good, if not better than that, and I would probably need to read both books to see just how well, of course, they were adapted, and if this is as sophisticated as it could have been. I've not read all of Misery. I started at one point. I just haven't gotten finished with it, and folks have told me that that is of course a more complex story, and that it's a little bit trimmed down more than it needs to be for the movie. I certainly didn't get the feeling that that's what was going on here, especially because it's 3 hours. And I want to talk a little bit about the format of this movie because I think it's really interesting. I'm sure the length was a turnoff for some people, and this doesn't feel like a premise that necessarily needs 3 whole hours. I ultimately really appreciated it because I got to spend so much time with these people, and Tom Hanks' character, Tom Hanks is the protagonist in this, and you cut a whole hour out of this movie, and I feel like it might watch more like a Cliff's Notes version, and so many movies have that, where it's like if only they were allowed to be the length they really needed to be to tell the story, you would appreciate these people, understand their motivations more, and maybe it's worth the extra hour or half hour, or whatever it is, sacrifice out of your life. And I'm not saying that every movie needs to be 3 hours in order to do that. Some things don't have as much character work to do as other things, and some things are more like short stories. This was a serialized story in the first place. Stephen King released this in 6 parts, serialized, and then eventually put it together as a novel. What's really interesting to me in finding that out, because I didn't know that until after I watched the movie, is I was seeing that in the film. And so it's 3 hours, and I felt like I was seeing a very clear half-hour break mark every half hour, where this could have been a miniseries, like a TV miniseries. In fact, I found myself after the second part, you have the very beginning where John Coffey is picked up and brought to death row. And I guess I should set up the premise of this in case you've not seen it, because this is not a spoiler cast. It's essentially how I felt about. So let me set up the premise first. So this is a movie about a town in 1935 during the Depression with a death row unit that is run by Tom Hanks. And Tom Hanks' character is Paul Edgecombe. And Paul brings in this... So he's the warden, and he gets this man who is Michael Clark Duncan. He's this a really big, burly black man who has allegedly murdered 2 little girls, and it's the most heinous crime anybody around these parts in this little southern town in 1935 has ever seen. It's just gruesome and horrifying. And he seems like the kind of guy who wouldn't hurt a fly, and he is a little bit slow and is not the most intelligent person, but he is really gentle and kind, and Edgecombe cannot understand how this guy could have possibly done this. And it turns out that he has the ability to heal people by touching them. And this is, of course, when it becomes a very Stephen King thing. This guy basically has The Shining plus a little bit more. Like, he's able to heal people, but he also is telepathic, and he's like a touch telepath, and his powers seem to have everything to do with negative and positive energy, and we kind of literalize evil and good as almost physical entities that become manifest in people. And so there's always a trade-off. So whenever he heals somebody, he takes the badness out of them. He doesn't make them not a bad person, but the idea is that there's literal evil that is manifested in people. And I don't think that what Stephen King is getting at here, and in Darabont, that it's about trying to make people not responsible for their actions. It's not the devil made me do it. It's the choices people make create evil, and evil becomes almost a physical manifestation. And it's interesting because it doesn't watch like a cynical piece, and yet it shows the good and bad side of humanity, of course, but it does say there are good people and bad people, and I don't think it's suggesting that people can't make their own choices, but it is, and that people can't necessarily get better. There's this horrible guy who works at the prison in this named Percy, who is just the most heinous guy you could imagine, and seems to take advantage of people just because he can. And I don't get the sense that the movie is saying that he can't be better than that. He can't be more than the sum of his parts, and he's given every opportunity for change, but he never takes them, and he's just this really bad, awful person because he can be. And I think it's saying that we all have that potential, and our circumstances and our background make up the kinds of people that we are, but there's kind of a question of individual people's nature. And so I don't think it's outright saying that you are just whoever you are and there's nothing you could do about it, and if you're a good person, then congratulations, you were just born that way, and if you're a bad person, boo, unfortunately you were born that way. But it is kind of asking the question of where evil comes from. And my read on it, again, is that evil is bad choices that people make. And this is something of a morality play, right? Where the universe, at the end, kind of makes a judgment call and decides, and uses John, this powerful miracle to get rid of the bad people, to eliminate that evil. And it's kind of a catharsis, I think, for Stephen King. That's how it watches to me. But anyway, I'm kind of just trying to figure this out and read this right after I've watched it. This is somewhat dense material, and I kind of want some more time with it, and I'd love to sit down and this would be an interesting movie to write about. But anyway, so I just wanted to set up the initial premise and what this movie is about. It's about obviously mortality, and it's about evil, and it's about innocence versus guilt, and what people really are versus how society looks at them, and it's certainly about justice as well. But anyway, so I was noticing very quickly, about an hour in, that this movie could easily, and I was hoping it would hold, and it did, that this movie could easily be turned into 6 half-hour episodes. And I found myself wanting to edit it that way. Like, I think this would be a really good watch on, like, a day-to-day basis. Just watch it half hour at a time. I'm not saying it's boring. I'm not saying that it was difficult to sit down and sit through 3 whole hours of this. But I don't think I've ever seen something where it would be easy to do that kind of an edit and you wouldn't have to change a frame of it, like anything at all. I don't mean to say that it would be easy to restructure this as a miniseries. I'm saying that I was watching a complete cohesive movie and simultaneously a miniseries. It works as both things. There's no adaptation that needs to be made. And that was really impressive to me. And then later, I come to find out that that's actually exactly what it's doing, like intentionally, apparently, because, again, Stephen King published this initially as 6 shorter stories that all become this novel. And it fits perfectly in 6 half hours. So that's exactly how Darabont was doing this. And so not only does he have clear reverence for the source material, and he's trying to, as far as I can tell, because I've not read it, an adaptation that is true to the source material, but even true sort of to the original format of this. And maybe it just works out really well that way, where if you put it up pretty straight off the page, you're without changing too much, you're just and without worrying about length, too, you're going to end up seeing where those breaks for those 6 individual stories would be. So I thought that was really fascinating. This has some, of course, absolutely wonderful, brilliant performances. I think all the casting in this is great and spot on. This is an all-star cast. I recognized almost everybody. And when I say all-star, there's also a bunch of really good character actors in this movie. Percy is played by one of the early X-Files Freaks of the Week, I should say, and he's really good. I liked all the casting in this movie. A lot of Star Trek alum. James Cromwell is in this movie. Sadler, what is his name? William Sadler has a bit part in this movie. So I was this is not a criticism of the movie, but I was occasionally taken out just because I know so many of these actors, or I was trying to place them, because this is like 20 years ago now, and so there's a lot of actors in this movie that I maybe didn't know until later, that going back and looking at it now, I'm recognizing everybody. This is one of the best Tom Hanks performances I've ever seen. He is incredibly likable and sympathetic in this movie. He is this really straight-laced, no nonsense. Well, I say no nonsense. He certainly has a sense of humor. And by the way, I'm surprised by the levity in this movie. This is in places, I don't want to say laugh out loud funny, but it's not relentlessly dark and depressing like I might have expected. And under a lesser pen and a lesser director, it very easily could have been. It would have been really easy to play this as just a really bleak thriller or horror film or something, and it's not doing that. Like, obviously, it is a morbid film because of its subject matter, and it gets really depressing, and it's ultimately a super sad movie, but it earns that sadness because I care about these characters, and I end up caring about all of the inmates on death row that I'm supposed to, and then of course I hate the ones that I'm supposed to hate, but it's still not fun to see anybody get hurt or die or anything in this. It's not that kind of movie where it's like, oh boy, finally that guy got his comeuppance, let's see him in the electric chair. Like, it's a turn of the knife every time somebody goes to the electric chair, which happens multiple times in the movie, and especially, of course, right at the very end. But Tom Hanks is just a regular working guy who has a lot of compassion for the people that are on death row. He's not trying to punish them any more than they're already being punished by being in prison and, being condemned to death. He's just doing his job. This is one of the best examples I've seen of the law just being carried out by public officials, where these people, with the exception of Percy, because he's this really horrible, sadistic guy who just got this job because he's the nephew of a governor's wife and he can get any job he wants to, and he's really lazy, but he's also just really mean and doesn't see the inmates as people and is constantly trying to find ways to hurt them. And one of the most mortifying scenes I've ever seen in anything is in this movie, and again, it's a real feat that this is as entertaining, and watchable as it is. Obviously, a lot of this movie is not fun to watch, but I got really immersed and sucked in, and was enjoying living in this world as bleak as it is, and this, or at least as sad as it is, and there's this, and so it's impressive that it's got that levity, but it can also really, really unnerve you. And there's the scene where Percy intentionally, just because he can, leaves off the sponge when he puts the cap on a person that he's been tormenting the whole movie, one of the inmates who's on death row. And the way the electric chair works is if that wet sponge is supposed to be a conductor of the electricity and this is going to be really morbid, but to make it so that the person's head doesn't catch fire. And that ends up happening in a scene in this movie, and oh my goodness, it was hard to watch, but really effectively executed. So like I said, Tom Hanks' character Paul, he's just a guy doing his job and carrying out what the law requires, making no judgment really on any of these inmates. And his main job, of course, is to keep the peace. And I feel like this could have been a TV show, just this premise where every week you just watch this guy trying to keep all these guys on death row from slitting each other's throats. And it's not the kind of movie where all the inmates hate each other and you constantly have a lot of jail yard fights and things like that, but it is still a really volatile situation. There are enough of these guys, and there's not a lot of them. It's a real small prison. There are enough of these guys who are gentle enough and don't seem to want to hurt anybody, at least anymore. And you just have a couple of really insane or sadistic outliers who cause a lot of problems. And so you have kind of two schools of thought in this prison. You got Percy's, which is treat these people like animals and hurt them and take advantage of them every chance you get, because they're gonna die anyway, and who cares? And this is part of their punishment. And then you have Edgecombe, who looks at it more as, look, they're paying their debt to society, and it's not fair for me to make it any worse than them. But more importantly, the harder we make their lives, the harder it makes our lives, and the better chance of an implosion, in the prison. And so you've got some really good drama that comes from that relationship. And I just found him to be a wonderfully sympathetic character who I wanted to see succeed. And I found myself feeling kind of sorry for him at the end of the movie. He is a somewhat tragic character, and I'm still not completely sure how I feel about the ending. I think if I have any reservation at all, it is the way the movie ends, and I just need more time with it, because I'm not sure if I really have a problem with it or not. I just need to spend some time digesting it. But he's basically said at the end of the movie to be atoning for his sin with the way he ultimately ends up handling John Coffey, the guy who was thought to have murdered those girls, but who I will tell you did not do that, and who heals people. And throughout the movie, he keeps performing these miracles, and there's this great scene where Paul brings Johnny, breaks him out of the prison, and he takes him to his boss's house, James Cromwell, to help Cromwell's ailing wife, where she has dementia, and she's kind of losing her mind. She has I'm not sure what illness she has exactly, but she's in really bad shape. Oh, she's got a tumor. That's what it is. And he brings him there to heal the tumor. And that's just an absolutely amazing scene. And but ultimately, Paul, has to do his job, and I won't give away what exactly happens with the powers and everything, but there is a supernatural thing that happens because of John's relationship with Paul, that the movie at the end kind of interprets, or at least Paul himself interprets, as his punishment for what he does to John Coffey. And I don't think Stephen King is very often really great at sticking landings. His stories, and he admits this himself, are never really about the endings. And so I wasn't sure how satisfied I was by that conclusion with this, because I thought he was kind of too hard on himself, and maybe the universe was a little bit too hard on him as well. That's kind of how I felt about it. At the same time, the thing that he's calling a punishment, it's up to everybody themselves to decide whether that for them would be a good thing or a bad thing, I guess. I'm talking cryptically because I don't want to give too much away about this, but there's a bookend where you see an old Paul at a nursing home, and he's telling the story to another woman that's there, and like I said, that's bookended. So the whole movie, I'm thinking that the dates don't line up, where I don't see how the guy at the nursing home could possibly be the same guy in 1935, because he just seems like he would have to be too old and he couldn't be around anymore. And it turns out I was right, and that's actually a plot point, and the movie deals with it, and that's fantastic. So like the whole movie, I was trying to figure out how this timeline matches up, and then it's actually revealed. It's part of the movie. So I thought that was just wonderful. There's some really interesting symbols in this movie that I want to spend some time with, and I'm not going to try to interpret and analyze here because I'm not totally sure what some of them are getting at. But I know there's something with some of this stuff. There is a motif with a mouse, who I think is supposed to be the like a symbol for innocence, but also for misunderstood innocence, or like perceived evil. where this mouse is just trying to survive, just going out of its like about its business, and you get people like Percy who, just because it's a mouse, want it dead. And I think the mouse is supposed to represent John Coffey, who has exactly that. He's just this guy that's minding his own business and doing the best he can for himself and others. And he's misunderstood. He's got this. He's got this power. Nobody understands it. Nobody realizes that he can do what he can do. And I think the idea with the little girls is supposed to be that he was trying to save them, but they were too far gone and there wasn't anything he could do. And so he was holding them, but they were murdered by somebody else. And he was trying to save them. I think that's what's going on there, but I'm not totally sure how he wound up with them in his lap when he was found, and it was just decided that he must be the murderer. But this is 1935. Part of the reason the blame is put on him, and nobody really investigates and looks at any other theories, even though he says that he's innocent, is because he's a black man, and there is certainly a racial component to this. And so I think that's what the mouse is doing. And then there's this whole thing with like urination and phallic stuff, which is also very Stephen King, that I'm not completely sure how to read yet, where you've got, and I found this to be really interesting, and I was trying to wrap my brain around it, but I'm not totally sure what it's getting at with it, where Paul Edgecombe has a urinary tract infection, and the first big miracle that John Coffey does is he helps him with that. And I don't know if that's saying something about manhood or what exactly we're doing with that, but, you know, he's got a urinary tract infection, and then there's another place where Percy, who is, again, one of the big, villains of the movie, like, wets himself, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think those two things are related, but I'm not 100% sure what to do with it yet. So if anybody that's seen this movie has a read on that, I'd love to see your comments about it. But anyway, I am absolutely feeling it. I liked this movie a lot. I will certainly go back to it and look at it. I was surprised by how vintage, quintessential Stephen King this really was. Like, a lot of his staples are here, but handled really thoughtfully and maturely, and looked, felt, like I said, a lot more like reading a novel than watching a movie, which I really enjoyed. This is an excellent piece. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Hope you had a good time, and leave me a comment if you've seen this movie and tell me what you think about it. And if there's something you would like me to review, you can become a patron at the $15 tier, and I will review something for you every so often. I'll put you on the rotation, and right now we have a good number of people there, so every 2 to 3 months or so you should get one. And you can also do a one-time donation if you would prefer to do that, and again, through Patreon, you can just come in 1 month and I'll get you on the list. Once again, I was Captain Logan. Thanks so much for watching, everybody.